What if I told you the biggest reason Copilot feels underwhelming in your workflow has nothing to do with the AI model and everything to do with your data? Think about it. Copilot only knows what you feed it. And if what you're feeding it is sloppy, outdated, or hidden behind broken permissions, you're not getting value. You're getting noise. Today, we're cutting through that noise with 10 best practices that will flip Copilot from a guessing game into a precision tool. The preview? Your current setup could be one adjusting away from unleashing Copilot's real power. The silent saboteurs hiding in SharePoint. Ever wonder why Copilot's answers sometimes feel vague, even when you're sure the data exists somewhere in your tenant? The culprit is often hiding in plain sight, sitting silently in neglected SharePoint libraries. These libraries, once created with the best of intentions, turn into overstuffed dumping grounds as time moves on. Every project, every handover, every poorly named folder adds to the pile. Before long, you've got what some admins call data graveyards, collections of files that no longer serve a purpose but still live in the same environment Copilot is expected to crawl. That buildup becomes an invisible drag on how effectively Copilot works day to day. Think about how most organizations use SharePoint. Initial enthusiasm fuels the structure. Teams spin up neat folders, maybe even apply some metadata. But over the months and years, the maintenance fades. Files get duplicated because it's quicker than finding the right version. Department A names something final parser draft, while Department B calls their version final parser draft and copy. Users save outdated versions in shared libraries rather than personal storage, thinking it'll be easier for everyone to find later. Multiply that across hundreds of libraries and suddenly Copilot faces tens of thousands of potential answers, many of them conflicting. Now, instead of returning a confident contextual response, Copilot is caught between contradicting files, each claiming to be the source of truth. It's a lot like opening your garage after 5 years of ignoring it. Sure, the tools you need are technically there somewhere, but they're buried under broken toys, boxes of holiday decorations, and a treadmill you swore you'd get back on. If you ask someone else to find what you need in that mess, they'd probably come back with the wrong wrench, or worse, give up entirely. That's exactly what Copilot deals with when it tries to navigate a cluttered SharePoint instance. It searches, it finds, but with no clear indicators of which version is authoritative, you end up with general, surface-level outputs that don't inspire much trust. This isn't just opinion, it's tied to how AI models handle unstructured data overall. When data lacks consistent labeling, organization, or context, machine learning engines waste processing cycles guessing rather than delivering precision. In practical terms, that means more vague summaries, less accurate references, and weaker insights. Instead of leveraging the power of context to tighten answers, the system drowns in noise. So when business leaders complain that Copilot feels basic, much of the disappointment comes back to the structure, or lack thereof, of the underlying data estate. And metadata, or the absence of it, plays a bigger role than most teams realize. Good metadata works like a road sign. It points Copilot directly to what's relevant. Without it, the system has nothing to distinguish between two files with near-identical names. Basic tags like department, region, or project phase can make the difference between a response that's dead on and one that's frustratingly off target. But in most organizations, tagging gets skipped either because users see it as busy work or governance simply hasn't prioritized it. That's how unstructured piles grow into unmanageable silos. And silos are deadly for an AI that relies on context above all else. The irony is that fixing this problem isn't technically difficult. Cleaning up a library doesn't require complex automation or advanced skills. It requires commitment to regular maintenance and governance. Archiving or deleting no longer relevant files, merging duplicates, and applying mandatory metadata fields are simple steps that transform how Copilot interprets your workspace. To the user, it feels like switching on a light in a dim room. Suddenly, Copilot is no longer hedging its bets with vague summaries. It begins pulling the exact report, referencing the correct version, and even delivering contextual notes that map closely to what was actually decided. Imagine asking Copilot for a marketing strategy file and getting the actual approved plan with the correct revision history and supporting notes instead of 3 mismatched drafts and an archived template. That shift alone changes the level of trust people place in the tool. Over time, trust is what scales Copilot from a novelty to an everyday decision support system, and the gateway to building that trust is reducing clutter in the first place. So, while cleaning up those dusty libraries might feel like repetitive housekeeping, it's the hidden accelerator for real AI effectiveness. The technical model behind Copilot hasn't changed, you've simply taken away the extra friction. And with that friction gone, Copilot can finally surface responses that feel sharp, tailored, and business-ready. If SharePoint clutter turns the workspace into a messy garage, then broken permissions are something else entirely. They're like locked doors with the keys missing, keeping Copilot from even stepping into the room where the right answers live. Blind spots built by broken permissions. Imagine asking Copilot for a complete summary of last quarter's performance reports. The files exist, multiple teams worked on them, and they're sitting somewhere in SharePoint or Teams. But the answer you get back is strangely incomplete. Copilot cites a handful of documents, skips entire regions, and ignores important updates. The problem isn't that the files disappeared. They're there. The issue is that broken permissions have made half the dataset invisible, and when Copilot can't see it, it can't use it. Permissions in Microsoft 365 are almost never static. They're impacted every time someone changes roles, when a project ends, or when a contractor leaves. If those permissions are not actively maintained in Azure AD, they pile up into a patchwork of group memberships and outdated access lists. Add in inconsistent sharing policies, maybe one team uses link-based sharing while another locks everything behind custom groups, and suddenly Copilot is navigating a maze full of dead ends. From the user side, it looks like the AI is missing obvious answers. In reality, the system is bound by the walls we've accidentally built. That creates a strange paradox most admins know all too well. On one side, you want secure data, sensitive reports, customer records, employee information. No one wants those wide open for anyone with a login. On the other side, when you clamp down too tightly, the AI becomes blind to the very data your business leaders are relying on for decisions. The result is an awkward balancing act where data is either locked down so securely it might as well not exist, or so openly shared it raises compliance red flags. Neither state makes anyone comfortable, and Copilot ends up being the one caught in the middle. Picture a relatable day-to-day example. A manager asks Copilot to summarize project insights from the last 6 months. They expect to see updates from every team, across every department involved. What they get back is only half the picture. 2 teams' reports are there, but 3 others are missing. From their perspective, that looks like Copilot hasn't been trained well enough or can't handle cross-team information. Trust in the tool takes a hit. Behind the scenes, though, it's permissions that created the gap. One department stored files in a restricted site with outdated guest policies. Another kept everything in a security group that no one updated after project members rotated. The data exists, but as far as Copilot knows, it doesn't. Stale accounts make the issue worse. Old user profiles hang around long after employees leave. Sometimes those profiles still have permissions tied to groups or sites, while current team members remain excluded. The result is asymmetric access, where Copilot sees outdated memberships but misses the people actually doing the work. Over time, these inconsistencies multiply, creating so many blind spots that Copilot's answers seem generic even when your data is rich. That erosion of trust isn't just technical, it's cultural. Once staff assume the AI can't be relied on, adoption stalls. At the core, this proves a simple point. Copilot is only as smart as the access it's given. You could have the cleanest, most well-labeled dataset in the world, but if the AI can't reach half of it, you'll never see its full potential. It's like recommending movies on Netflix while blocking most of the library. Sure, the suggestions you get are technically relevant, but they come from such a small slice of the whole offering that you miss entire genres. The output feels shallow because the inputs are defined by invisible restrictions. The fix isn't mysterious. Role-based access models have been around for years, but many organizations apply them unevenly or abandon them over time. Cleaning up group memberships, regularly reviewing who has access, and aligning policies across departments prevents those invisible walls from forming in the first place. With clear, consistent structures, Copilot operates within the same context your teams actually work with. What was once a half-empty summary becomes a complete report. What felt like a vague answer turns into a well-rounded insight. That's when people stop questioning Copilot's usefulness and start trusting it as an everyday tool. And once permissions are giving Copilot the full view, the next question becomes scale. Seeing data is one thing, but moving from insights to action is a bigger leap. That's where Power Automate steps in, because if permissions define what Copilot can see, automation defines how far it can go. Automation as Copilot's missing engine. Copilot can answer your questions, but what if it could also orchestrate entire workflows? Right now, most people see Copilot as a tool for information retrieval. You ask, it responds. That's powerful on its own, but it stops short. Imagine if instead of just pulling the facts, it could automate the actual processes around those facts. That's where Power Automate comes in. It's the missing engine converting Copilot from a helpful assistant into a driver of real business outcomes. Think of it as the bridge between insights and action, linking what Copilot knows with what your business needs done. On its own, Copilot can summarize a meeting, draft a message, or surface a report. Useful, yes, but fundamentally static. What happens after you get that summary? You still have to copy the follow-ups into Teams, manually update dynamics with customer notes, or send tasks into Planner. That's where the gap lies. Without a way to trigger workflows, Copilot outputs stay trapped in a loop of, here's the information. With Power Automate, those same answers flow directly into your business processes, making them dynamic and actionable. Copilot stops being reactive and starts enabling things to move forward. Take a common example we've seen in many organizations. After a project meeting, everyone leaves with notes, decisions, and action items scattered across email and chats. Copilot can collect that information, but what changes the game is when a flow kicks in. Imagine Copilot generating the meeting summary, then automatically creating tasks in Planner for each action item, sending reminders into the appropriate Teams channels, and updating dynamics with new opportunities discussed, all without anyone having to click through 3 different apps. That single workflow turns a scattered follow-up process into something seamless that happens in real time. The benefit is less about saving a handful of clicks and more about consistency. When Copilot handles the follow-through through automation, you're not relying on individual habits. People forget to update records, skip reminders, or lose tasks in email clutter. Power Automate removes that variability. The summary you asked for isn't just text sitting in Outlook. It translates into concrete actions your systems can track and measure. Over time, that builds a culture where information doesn't just sit in silos. It moves instantly into where work is actually taking place. Without Power Automate, Copilot feels like GPS without a car. It can tell you where to go, highlight possible routes, and even warn you of traffic jams, but you're still standing on the sidewalk. Automation supplies the vehicle. It takes the knowledge Copilot surfaces and pushes it into motion. That's why organizations that tie flows into Copilot adoption talk about multiplying value rather than just adding to it. The technology doesn't just make existing processes a little faster. It often reshapes how those processes exist in the first place. Finance teams have used these connections to cut manual reconciliation times by automating expense report drafting from Copilot summaries. HR has tied flows into candidate tracking. Copilot drafts interview notes that trigger updates in tracking systems instantly, eliminating the lag between conversation and record keeping. In project management, teams kick off entire workflows when Copilot summarizes a client call. Tasks spawn, timelines update, and communications trigger automatically. The common thread is that once automation links context to process, Copilot's value compounds rather than incrementally improves. What makes this so effective is that Copilot isn't really the one doing the automation. It's interpreting and contextualizing human requests, then handing them off to Power Automate where the execution happens. The AI understands intent, but automation delivers impact. This division of labor matters because it stops the system from being just another chat interface and turns it into a control point for end-to-end workflows. You ask Copilot a question, it interprets, it cues a flow. The end result is not only an answer, but also an action completed in the background. As organizations experiment, they often realize how scalable this becomes. Setting up 1 or 2 flows feels like a small win, but once adoption spreads, patterns emerge. The flows aren't random, they codify the repetitive, structured tasks that used to eat up staff time. Copilot becomes the natural way to trigger them, lowering the effort needed to maintain adoption. Instead of IT designing an automation strategy top-down, the interface nudges users into automation one response at a time. The role of Copilot shifts from text generator to workflow conductor, quietly orchestrating business processes behind the scenes. Over time, this approach produces measurable efficiencies. Teams notice less lag between meetings and action. Projects move forward faster because friction in handovers decreases. Compliance improves when records update automatically rather than through manual entry. And perhaps most importantly, trust builds. Users recognize Copilot isn't just spitting out information, it's embedded into the fabric of their workflow, making systems feel more cohesive. That trust is hard to earn with static answers, but it comes naturally when automation backs every insight with real execution. Linking Copilot to Power Automate is not about novelty. It's about closing the loop between insight and delivery. Organizations that stop at summaries leave potential on the table. Those that connect flows unlock exponential returns in time savings, accuracy, and consistency. Copilot becomes less of a tool you occasionally query and more of a teammate shaping day-to-day operations. But for all this orchestration to work smoothly, there's a catch. The language Copilot depends on, things like file names, metadata, and even the way conversations unfold can still throw it off if they're inconsistent. And when that happens, automation only amplifies the chaos. When metadata lies and conversations scatter, you tell Copilot to grab the Q4 report, and instead it drops 3 different files with nearly identical names: final report plus V2, final report as V2.1, and final report as V2 final. None of them carry useful metadata. Which one is right? Copilot can't tell either. That's the exact moment when confidence in AI starts to falter. From the outside, it looks like Copilot got it wrong, but the real culprit is the data hygiene behind the scenes. Without consistent naming or tags, the system is left guessing what matters and what doesn't. We've all seen how this plays out. One team swears their document is the final version. Another team makes tweaks, saves a new copy, and calls it final 2. Over time, you end up with 4 or 5 different final reports, each slightly out of sync. Add in a SharePoint library without useful metadata like author, region, or project phase, and suddenly Copilot is pulling results that feel random. The AI isn't confused about your request. It's being fed a chaotic environment where all signals look the same, and no file stands out as the true source of record. The same issue shows up in conversations. Teams chat threads move quickly. Key details are buried 3 or 4 messages back, often in side discussions. Someone shares an attachment, decisions shift, and a summary never makes it back into the main channel. Later, when you ask Copilot to bring together the latest decision points, it scrapes fragments from different parts of the conversation. The context that seemed clear to the people on the call becomes scattered across multiple threads, leaving the AI to piece together something that doesn't quite line up. Picture a leadership team asking Copilot for a digest of customer feedback trends over the last quarter. They expect a clean summary with common themes. Instead, the answer feels incomplete. One set of files references survey data, but another set with interview notes is mislabeled and left out. Meanwhile, the crucial points from town hall chats are buried in a thread that wasn't tagged or summarized. Copilot returns what it can see, but the mosaic it builds leaves obvious gaps. The leadership team is left wondering if the system failed, when in truth it had nothing clear to work with. This happens because old metadata practices are often ignored. Teams treat tags as optional. A field like region or product line doesn't feel urgent when you're saving a file at the end of the day. Multiply that by hundreds of documents over time, and both search relevance and AI output collapse. Instead of using metadata as a guidepost, Copilot resorts to pattern matching on titles that are misleading or inconsistent. The net result is noise masquerading as signal. And when you're trying to make decisions, noise is costly. It's not hard to see the knock-on effects. Every additional cycle Copilot spends trying to pass conflicting data is another delay for the user. Decisions take longer because you're passing through AI summaries for accuracy instead of relying on them. Meetings stretch out while people debate versions of truth. The technology designed to accelerate workflows ends up slowing them down, not out of weakness, but because it can't read the chaos we've introduced into the system. It's a lot like walking into a library where half the index cards are mislabeled and the other half direct you to books in different unmarked rooms. Technically, every book is still there, but finding the one you want becomes a frustrating scavenger hunt. The librarian isn't incompetent. They're working without the tools that let them make accurate matches between request and resource. That's exactly how Copilot functions without consistent metadata and clear conversation structures. The good news is that the problem isn't unsolvable. Enforcing disciplined naming conventions helps files surface in ways that make sense. Requiring metadata fields at the point of saving puts signposts in place for both search and AI. And with teams, structuring conversations, using dedicated channels, summarizing decisions, and linking back to documents turns scattered fragments into connected context. These changes don't just clean things up on the surface, they provide the glue Copilot relies on to stitch together information that feels accurate and relevant. This isn't glamorous work, and it rarely gets celebrated, but when Copilot moves from giving you vague mixes of duplicates to surfacing the precise document with full context, the payoff is obvious. The AI starts to feel less like a clever parlor trick and more like a trusted system integrated into daily work. Fixing habits may be harder than fixing systems, but it's where the real impact lies. And the reward isn't just better responses from Copilot, it's a smarter, more resilient digital ecosystem that finally works as a whole. Unlocking the chain reaction of prepared systems. The biggest secret about Copilot? It doesn't thrive alone. It thrives when the whole Microsoft 365 ecosystem is tuned to support it. On paper, Copilot looks like the main attraction, but in reality, it's heavily dependent on the structures you've already built. Some organizations miss that connection and treat Copilot as though it's a plugin that will magically adapt to whatever data landscape it finds. That's where most of the disappointment starts. The tool isn't falling short because the intelligence is weak. It's falling short because the environment feeding it isn't stable or consistent. Think about the issues we've already walked through. SharePoint turns into a junk drawer when libraries sit unmanaged. Permissions decay over time, creating blind spots that no one notices until they ask a question Copilot can't answer properly. Automation is left on the sidelines, so information never flows into action. Metadata gets treated as optional, creating chaos for both search and AI. Taken individually, each of those problems is manageable. But together, they shape the reality in which Copilot operates. They're not random mistakes, they're habits. And those habits determine whether Copilot feels like a core part of your workflow or just another experiment that doesn't justify its license cost. When companies skip the preparation and plug Copilot into their existing mess, what happens is predictable. Users test out a few queries, find the answers a little vague or incomplete, and walk away unimpressed. Leaders start to question why they're paying extra for something that returns what feels like the same results they could get from standard search. The skepticism grows quickly, and soon the narrative shifts from "this will transform our work" to "this is another feature we'll turn off in 6 months." Without systemic readiness, Copilot becomes a proof point for AI fatigue rather than a driver of AI value. The insight that often reframes expectations is simple. It's not about Copilot learning more. It's about your systems feeding it less noise. The AI isn't sitting there inventing answers. It's amplifying the quality of what it finds. Reduce the clutter, normalize the access, connect insights to workflows, and suddenly Copilot doesn't feel like a guessing machine anymore. It begins to highlight the right context at the right moment, not after you've sifted through 5 misleading documents. That shift happens because the underlying systems did the work of filtering out the junk before it even reached Copilot. This is where the Microsoft 365 ecosystem matters more than most people realize. When SharePoint is governed, permissions are role-based and consistent, and metadata is structured, you create order. When Power Automate is layered on top, you start to transform that order into action. Each component supports the others, creating a fabric of interconnected workflows. It doesn't look flashy, but for Copilot, it's everything. In that environment, it doesn't waste cycles guessing versions of truth, and it doesn't get cut off from critical context. Instead, it can provide answers that really reflect how your business operates. One company we worked with treated these layers as part of the same project rather than separate fixes. They started with a standard SharePoint cleanup, setting retention policies and mandatory metadata tags. Then they aligned permissions with current roles, removing stale accounts and restructuring groups. After that, they introduced targeted Power Automate flows to handle repetitive updates like meeting follow-ups and CRM entries. Within a few months, Copilot went from being seen as a novelty tool to becoming the default way leaders requested updates. What changed wasn't the AI, it was the system it was connected to. By removing the friction, the organization let Copilot actually do what they thought it could do in the first place: surface reliable context and reduce human busywork. At this point, Copilot becomes easier to understand if you think less like a pilot flying solo and more like a conductor leading an orchestra. A conductor without tuned instruments is useless. They might know how to keep time, but the sound will be off and the audience won't care. Copilot works the same way. Without tuned systems behind it, every answer feels generic. But with everything aligned, it suddenly produces harmony, structured, contextual insights that flow naturally into how teams already work. That's the real shift. Copilot doesn't need upgrades to become powerful. It needs prepared systems that are ready to make it valuable. Once SharePoint, permissions, automation, and metadata are aligned, every part of Microsoft 365 amplifies the others. The data estate feeds context. Permissions provide visibility. Automation handles execution. Metadata ensures relevance. Copilot ties those strands together and pushes them back as clear, actionable insight. And that's where the final insight lands. Copilot isn't the magic. Your ecosystem prep is. Copilot doesn't fail because the engine is weak. It fails when your systems feed it noise instead of clarity. Every vague answer, every missing file, every half-complete summary ties back to cluttered libraries, broken permissions, or inconsistent metadata. That's not a Copilot problem, it's a systems problem. So here's the test. Audit one element this week. Clean one library, review one permission set, or enforce one metadata rule. You'll notice the difference almost immediately. Copilot doesn't replace strategy, it multiplies it. The real question isn't whether it works. The question is, are you feeding it noise or giving it signal?